You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. Welcome in and Happy New Year. 2022 is upon us, and our first guest of 2022 is Jared Benko, the athletic director at Georgia Southern University. Jared, thanks for being with me.
It was great to be here, Mike. Happy 2022.
Same to you. Same to you. I know we got a lot to look forward to in this year. We're going to jump right in, man. I've appreciated the chance to get to know you a little bit more over the last year and a half, last couple of years, as you've been there at Georgia Southern, getting the job right as we entered this whole pandemic in March of 2020, and I think starting in April of that year. The thing I find interesting as I look back at your bio is the fact that while you grew up in the state of Georgia and you're a Georgia grad, you've actually worked at 4 different SEC institutions, and I think that's intriguing to me. Maybe walk us a little bit through that and sort of the progression of your getting to Georgia Southern eventually there in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, it's by God's design and plan. I didn't think I'd be at 4 different SEC institutions growing up in Athens, and went to undergrad and grad school at UGA. Had a great chance to work with Claude Felton at UGA and under Damon Evans and Greg McGarity, and had an opportunity honestly at Arkansas that was right before our wedding, Mike. And so moving 2 months before the wedding is not something I would usually suggest, but it worked out well. And was there for 4 years. Had a chance to work with Jeff Long, a lot of great people there, Julie Cromer, John Fagg, and others at Arkansas, and Clayton Hamilton, and really had a chance at Auburn to work again with great people with Jay Jacobs and David Benedict, and then went to Mississippi State. And Scott knows this, but Scott Strickland was a big reason why I went to Mississippi State, just to align yourself with unbelievable people. And then this opportunity came up right after the Mike Leach hiring. This opportunity came up, and it was something for us, the chance to get back to our home state. Been away for almost 10 years, but really was a place that I thought had a ton of potential and unlimited opportunities to really drive this program to be in the Elite Group of 5 program.
Yeah. So when you think about the SEC, obviously one of the words that comes to my mind is just this, relentless competitiveness, right, in the league. And everybody has resources, their championship level performances across the board in multiple sports at all the schools that you've been at in particular. And then you transition that to your time at Georgia Southern, which historically has had, when the school was the FCS level, insane success, right? Just incredible success. And you're in a great league now in the Sun Belt, and getting even better now with the growth of the Sun Belt and the addition of some new schools. I'm curious, in learning from your time in the Southeastern Conference, obviously the resource notion is different. But it's all relative, right? So what are the things that you learn from a conference as competitive as the Southeastern Conference that you feel like are apropos and can be utilized in your role there at Georgia Southern?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. I would tell you everything matters. Every tiny little thing matters. Every sport matters. And so, for us, when you're in the SEC, and I tried to explain this to people when I got there, of why those competitive juices day in, day out, are there. And really for us, Mike, it was a chance to come here. Initially, I had a coach effort a lot more than what I'm used to. But I would tell you that our team's done a great job. Had a chance to bring in some people, too, that I've worked with in the past. And really now in year 2, as we approach, really honestly started year 3 for me, we're coaching more best practices and I guess strategy versus coaching effort and positioning people for success in year 1. And so the piece that I think is so important is in the SEC is it's so process driven in everything you do, to where you're not talking about outward goals, because if you start talking about championships in the SEC, that has a chance to usually come back and bite you. And so you have to be so process driven every day, bring your lunch bell. And it sounds Pollyanna at times, and I know some people from the outside looking in, but until you've been in the SEC, understand how competitive it is day in, day out. Particularly in the West, I point now to football in the West. You start talking, and now there's not a program that you can look at the schedule and say, well, that's going to be a win. All right. And so when you're so competitive, and that just extends beyond football, it's every sport. That's why it's a premier conference in the country. That when you go through those processes, Mike, and from being in the SEC as well, you get kind of get, I hate to say hardwired that way, but you understand what it takes to compete in elite level. And I think there's transferable skill sets that you can transition, from the schools I've been at to a Georgia Southern. And of course, it's not always apples to apples. You have to apply it in different ways, but you at least have a baseline. And then, of course, when you're hiring coaches, I give a lot of credence to people who've seen it done at a high level. And
Yeah.
so that's where a lot of times when you connect with coaches in the hiring process, recruitment process, is you're talking the same verbiage, right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the specific hire of Clay Helton in just a minute, relative to that statement you made. But one of the things that you've just alluded to, the fact that you've got some new staff members that have come on board with you. You've obviously had some new coach hires during your time there, and so it's one thing to talk about creating a standard of excellence, and you've alluded to what you experienced in your previous roles and being around that. How do you practically implement this
Yeah.
expectation, this culture, the creation of new standards to help? Again, Georgia Southern's had success historically, but now you're setting the tone as a new athletic director and creating your standards based on what your experiences have been like. How do you practically do that?
Well, one, you have to have people around you that are very talented and smarter than you. And so you're only as good as the people around you. And that's a big part of it, Mike. I would tell you, too, if you go through our organization, I would like to think that everybody knows what their role is. Everyone understands their role and understands why it's important to the overall mission and vision of our department. And then really our goal and my goal is in a lot of ways is to be out front and to have a vision and say, this is, kind of be a rudder. This is where we're going. Right. And then you have an idea and obviously ideate with your leaders in the department and those throughout the department of, hey, this is a vision. Here are the different initiatives and prongs. And we did a strategic plan last summer. Now let's work together on executing that. And so I think it goes back, Mike, to having clear guidelines of what roles are, defined roles, understanding standards of excellence. And quite frankly, Mike, I think I'm a big proponent of just being honest and direct with people. And I think when you have one-on-ones in particular, and you tell individuals that I'm personally and professionally invested in you, people have to know, just like our student athletes, that you care about them. And when they know, listen, you can be demanding and not demeaning. I think that's really important to bifurcate between those two. And so when you think about our role as leaders, and again, Mike, you've done a lot longer than I have. When you think about a chance to be an influencer, people talk about leadership a lot. It's a chance to influence the lives of your staff and your student athletes. And so I think there's a balance there of saying, hey, listen, we're going to work really, really hard, right? We're going to have fun. We're going to work really, really hard. But also, too, your career goals and ambitions can run parallel with the departments. And once they understand that, then really you have a chance to really to do some special things.
Yeah. So coach hires, I would say at the end of the day, athletic directors ultimately are judged by that, right? And today's world, and particularly a place where there's historical success. And so I want to break apart your coach hire decision this fall into three different segments. And the first question I want to lay down is this one of, when do you and why do you, I'm talking holistically, I'm not talking about you specifically, but I'm sure you'll address it through your specific lens, the notion of making a change during the season. That's one of the questions. I think you're seeing more of that today than was historically present. I know that when we went through a change that we went through with Coach Fulmer in 2008, we made a decision and announced it before the season was over. And some people viewed that with shock, right? But now you're seeing it much more regularly. And I remember one time Jeremy Foley said to me, like, when you know a decision is inevitable, you need to make the decision, right? So I'm curious as to, and maybe your situation this fall lent itself to that specific circumstance, and it might not be that way in another time that you face down the road at Georgia Southern or somewhere else. But the decision to make a change midseason, talk me through that, and what do you think those of us who are learning about this out here in different campuses and around the country, what do we need to hear and learn from what you experienced?
Yeah, well, I'm not the best person to answer just off one occasion doing it, but really, Mike, I was sharing with some of our donors and our president that really it was not a knee jerk reaction. It was a constant evaluation. One of the things I think is important, really in our roles as we continue to look at chance to influence others is I'm here to serve and really hopefully be a sacrificial leader to our coaches and staff and student athletes. But make no mistake, every day is an evaluation. It's a constant evaluation. And it's one of the things I thought Greg McGarity was good at Georgia was, hey, we're not going to make knee-jerk decisions. We're going to look at a whole body of work per se. And so that's one of the things that we try to do here. But I would tell you, Louisiana Monroe season 1 for us really was a chance for me to say, all right, we've got some structural and foundational elements. And at the end of the day, I think so important, Mike, is you want to be partners with your coaches and your senior staff, and really, quite frankly, with the president on down. And so the alignment piece is so important. And so when you're evaluating a program every day and you're trying to align yourself every day, in this instance, to be a football coach, and that relationship is not where you want it to be, and you've poured into those people. And again, my job is every day to empty my cup, right? And let's hope that the coach is receptive to the feedback, good and bad, that's been provided to him. But at the end of the day, when you look at going to this past season, we knew we were going to have some challenges. And I didn't see the progress in the off season, and quite frankly, the progress going to this season. And then when you have obviously incidents with student athletes, it really more affirmation that there's some structural foundational elements that are not where you want them to be. I just made the decision that it was time to move on. It's funny you mentioned Jeremy Foley. Jeremy reached out when I first got the job. You're talking about being hired in COVID and doing a basketball search in COVID, not meeting Coach Berg and hiring off of Zoom. I had talked to Jeremy Foley during that process. And so I actually called Jeremy before this, and I think it's a Henry Kissinger quote is what he a lot of times references to. And he said that to me, and he said it in a way we were talking about it. And I was already leaning towards making that decision. But I was talking to Jeremy and others of just mentors. At the end of the day, if I was going to make the decision, and we as an institution were going to make the decision a couple weeks down the road, why not go ahead and make it? Also, too, understanding that this year I thought there was going to be a lot of activity. Never would have guessed as much as it was. But there was to me a key strategy getting out early. The more I get out early, the more conversation, dialogue, Mike, as you can have, and be very transparent above the table about it. But two, I thought there were some advantages getting on people early, because I felt we had a good vision, a good plan, a good institution, a good footprint to recruit to. And so I thought getting out early as well, if I knew something wasn't going to work out, to be decisive about it and then be aggressive in recruiting.
Okay. So once you make a decision of that nature, then the next step is what next, right? And so I've got two questions related to that. And the first is very specific to Georgia Southern, and the second is more specific to your philosophy and hires. And the first is this, and you and I talked about this fall, I believe, at Cal's or somewhere, but the idea that Georgia Southern historically, going back to the Irk Russell roots, right, has been known as this hard-nosed, tough defense, running game type program stylistically. And that's what the fans were accustomed to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the question I have for you is, do you give credence to that as a matter of fact, that that's the historical significant way that the Georgia Southern has been successful? It's the way that fans have known Georgia Southern as a successful football program. And you, let's say, cheat towards that in terms of the way you interview and the way you hire? Or do you just to say that we acknowledge this, but we're going to hire the best coach for the job at the moment? And maybe I'm kind of leading the witness a little bit, but I'm curious as to how you process that.
No, that's a great question. And I think that's something that was on the minds of a lot of our, donors, fans, and supporters. And so, Mike, to answer your question, I mean, to me, it's not really indifferent of a lot of searches you do. We're trying to find the best coach. I use the example all the time. If I was going to go out and hire a basketball coach and I had a specific niche, well, I'm being very very specific in who ultimately the candidate pool is going to rear, right, and who's going to render out of that pool. And so for me, it was really important to, one, go in and try to eliminate as much confirmation bias as possible and try to find the best coaches. And so we interviewed people, everything that ran from an option to an air raid. And at the end of the day, when you start going back to fit, and when we made this decision to move on from Coach Lunsford and then obviously go into the search process, I'd had almost a year and a half here at Georgia Southern. I had a pretty good idea, at least in my mind, what the fit was. And so a lot of it was core competencies of the individual, experience, ability to recruit well. And I'm kind of leading into why we hired Clay. But at the end of the day, Mike, I didn't think it would be a disservice to us as an institution and also as a football program to say, hey, we're only going to hire one certain type of coach. Let's cast a wide net out. Let's be very diligent. And here's the thing, Mike. I mean, I was able to get out early. I talked to 17 coaches, and I'm not talking just a conversation. I'm talking on Zoom and lengthy 1+ hour conversations. And so we were able to do really good due diligence on the front end. And I think that's a credit to keeping a wide net and not being too, I'd say, too much tied into the minutia early on of a certain style of offense.
Yeah. What matters to you personally most
Yeah.
when you're looking at a head coach for, your student athletes are at the center of all this at the end of the day, right, Jared? And you want to
Yeah.
put the right coach in front of the student athletes to allow them to have the best possible experience at your institution. And so you have to be mindful of the kind of person that you're hiring.
Yeah.
But for you personally, what does that person look like? What kind of characteristics do they exude? What sticks out for you when you're going through this process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be kind of boilerplate, Mike, but to me, it first starts with integrity. I had someone tell me early on and say, hey, Jared, you mentioned this, you referenced it earlier, Mike going through the process, this is your first football hire as an AD. You're going to be forever aligned with this person and this individual. And that ties back a lot to integrity. And so to me, is someone that at the end of the day, I don't stay up at night worrying about what they're doing, away from the office or in the office per se at times. Two is somebody that's had a history of winning. And here's what's interesting when you look at Clay Helton's background, he was more successful winning percentage wise than Sarkisian and Kiffin and Ogeron. So he had success at USC. And he would tell you, I think fit wise, it probably wasn't his best fit. I think he's a great fit down here. Three, he's recruited at a really high level. Four, I think is important. He's assembled and has already assembled a great staff here. And then five, I would tell you, I think it's important to align yourself with really good people. Someone asked me today, what does Coach Helton remind you of? I'd say he's a more extroverted Coach Rick. And I love Coach Rick. Worked with Coach Rick for 10 years in Athens as a student and as a full-time person. I have a ton of respect for Coach Rick and hold him in high esteem. Clay Helton's that type of person. And so to me, at the end of the day, I thought he had a really good balance between he's got a chip on his shoulder, but he also, at the end of the day, can put his arm around student athletes and staff and work really well together. And so, I want someone that at the end of the day, Mike, when we're celebrating, it's easy to have fun and celebrate good times, but when adversity hits, who do I want to be in a foxhole with? And there was a no-brainer. And Clay, is a tremendous person. And at the end of the day, I think his best football is ahead of him. And so to me, it was really an easy decision. And then when you get to that point, you have a chance to get someone in early. And really what you're starting to see with both of our staff and recruiting class, that extra 5 to 6 weeks, while that wasn't the primary driver of decision-making of hiring Clay, really paid dividends.
Yeah, that's great analysis of why you hired Clay Helton. One question I have, just as follow up to that, and I think it's a natural question to ask. So he moves from Southern Cal to Georgia Southern. How do you work with a coach who's had success at that level to help them understand, let's call it the difference in resource allocation? Certainly there's no shortage of expectation of championship performance, and you're going to resource him and support him to the greatest extent possible. But at the end of the day, there might be some difference in those allocations, right? So how do you help him walk through that?
Well, listen, I don't think you have to look very far. I mean, I think I have a ton of respect for, give you your example, Billy Napier, what he did in our conference and others. And Jamie Chadwell, listen, recently, they've taken approaches that we've done at different schools that I've been at and others at Power 5 level and instituted it at their institution. So there's no secret sauce per se. It's ultimately when you're trying to recruit somebody to your school, you got to be open and honest with them. And so every coaching search, Mike, I've ever done, I say, all right, here's where we're great at, here's where we're okay at, and here's where we really stink at. And I think between being open, honest, and candid and being direct, but also to selling them on the vision of where we're going. And so much when you hire coaches, Mike, as you know, they're buying into your vision as an AD. They're buying into the alignment with the president. And we're blessed here with the best president, in my opinion, in the country. And someone that understands how important athletics is and the impact it can have on young men and women. And so when you look at the alignment piece, the vision where we're going, the vision piece, Mike, at the end of the day, I think it's transferable whether you're a Power 5 or G5 of being the premier group of 5 institution in the country. And you can have that same goal of being the preeminent Power 5 institution in the country. So those don't change much. How you get there is different because you're not getting a $50+ million check in June, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of those same core competencies and same vision. And I'll give you a great example. Working with Clay, say, Clay, this is what we had to work with from a staff. And due to some fundraising records we've hit recently and the influx of resources, we want to increase that pool. But at the end of the day, there's finite resources at every institution I've been at. Even at a Texas A&M and a Texas, there's finite resources. At some point, you have certain resources. So at the end of the day, it's about an allocation of resources. And so Clay understood from day one, and we sat down early with Chris Davis, our deputy AD, and others, and sat down and said, this is what we have to work with. Let's be upfront about it. And so having those conversations, Mike, early through the interview process, it wasn't one of those, bait and switch deals where we got them on board now. Well, here's what you have to work with, right? No, let's be open and honest. This is what we have to work with. It puts us in the top third quartile of the Sun Belt, which is good, but we're not going to be complacent. We're going to take and grow that. But let's just make sure we're on the same page right out of the gates of what we have to work with. And so I just think it's you can take a lot of core competencies, but you got to start at day one at the same starting point of saying, this is what we have to work with. We're not going to be complacent about it. We're going to grow that pool, but let's just make sure day one we're starting out the same spot.
Yeah. That's good feedback. So Sun Belt, you mentioned the Sun Belt. Great football league, getting better with the addition of the new schools, right? And a lot of movement this fall, to be sure. And I'm sure that you guys were sitting there thinking, okay, where is this all headed, and where do we fit in all this? And at the end of the day, you, in my opinion, anyway, I think you're in a great spot, right? And so when as the athletic director of Georgia Southern, and you're seeing all that's happening around you, and there are conversations happening at the commissioner level, there are conversations happening among athletic directors. Just speak to, for a moment, if you could, about how you saw that process playing out, and then your analysis of how at the end of the day, where it fell for you guys in the Sun Belt and for Georgia Southern specifically.
Well, listen, I mean, a lot of credit goes to Commissioner Gill, and also our president's group. And really, I love our AD group, and it's been great. The collegiality piece has been awesome. And so I think the right people were at the table at the right time to be aggressive. And I think the thing for us, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think we all would agree, Mike, if we talked to other ADs in the conference, is we are in a position of strength. In my opinion, the Sun Belt is a preeminent group of five in a conference right now in the country. And football, if you look at it, speaks for itself. Now, we've got opportunities to grow basketball, and again, baseball has a chance to grow. Softball had 4 NCAA regional, bursts last year. And so you look across the board, the Sun Belt's profile continues to grow. And so one starts with Commissioner Gill, leading those efforts. And then, yes, I think what you start looking at, Mike, is geographically, we had the best layout and the best footprint of any of the group of 5 conferences, in my opinion. And so when you start looking at that and overlaying that, we didn't feel like we had to bring schools in just on a whim. They had to meet our, academic profile, athletic profile, and ultimately geographic profile. And so I think that really positioned our conference for, one, I think having 14 football institutions are huge now. We were at 10. 12 members, but obviously 10 football. And so now we have a chance, scheduling wise, as we work through those changes to really set up some regional rivalries. We think, obviously, from a rating standpoint, the Sun Belt becomes more and more attractive to, different, obviously, ESPN, we're partnered with them. And so I think overall is a win-win. And I'm excited because I think our brand of football continues to grow. But I think it's a byproduct, Mike, of great leadership and really, too, I can't understate the presidents. The presidents, obviously the CEOs or institutions being willing to be aggressive and go out and acquire 4 institutions was really welcoming to see as well.
Yeah. So your entire athletic director tenure has been in the middle of a pandemic, Jared, and I'm sure that that's not lost on you. And you're probably longing for the day when this is all behind us and you can see what you can do outside of this unique scenario that we're kind of living through today. Obviously, talking in a very real way, in a very contemporaneous way, things have gotten a little hot again in terms of the spread of the virus and the number of positives and the cancellations that have come alongside of that in basketball this winter in particular. As you sit there today in your office and you look around you, what have you learned over the last year and a half that you think informs how we will get through this winter? I mean, I know it's not you specifically, it's all of us collectively as we walk through this, but what are the lessons to be learned so far that'll help us wade through these next couple of months in the dead of winter?
was we just actually had our senior staff meeting this morning. We talked about, again, we can use this as a growth opportunity or use it as a crutch, and we want to use it as a growth opportunity. So the good news for us is, and I'd say collectively as not only as an institution but as a country, is obviously the hospitalization rate and the death rates have gone down drastically. And so, yes, we have the infrastructure, Mike, in place to handle the testing and best practices associated with that, and obviously adjusting our internal policies and conference policies on quarantining and testing and return to play and whatnot. I think the piece for us, Mike, that's so important is really from day one. My first hire here actually was another sports psychologist, and really it's clinical, it's mental health and more clinical than sports psychology. But we have a great setup with not only 3 full-time psychologists, but also a partnership with our psychology department and kinesiology on campus. And so every team on campus has a sports psychologist with them. And sometimes they're doctoral students, sometimes they're full-time or master students. So the great thing about that, Mike, is my concern right out of the gate is going to be on the mental wellness piece. Because for our 18 and 22-year-olds, and now, of course, 23, 24, the COVID year, you know, for all of us is new, but also there's such an impressionable time, developmental time for these young men and women, to where my concern is on trying to be as proactive as possible in the mental wellness piece, mental health piece. And so I think we did some things last time that were really good, some things that we didn't find the buy-in participation wise. And so it's a constant tweaking, a constant looking of what are we doing service wise and adding that. So, and I also think too, it's continuing to arm our coaches and our staff, Mike, with information how to best look for signs of mental health concerns, how to make sure we're routing them the proper way, how to make sure that we're tracking on those the right way, and we're seeing growth and obviously positive improvement there. But that's where our focus is, quite honestly. Mike, I think our athletic training team and our campus team doctors have done an awesome job. And really, if you think back to even last year, we were one of only 2 institutions to play 13 plus games in football last year. So I thought our processes worked really well, but we can't sit there and say it's going to be the same this time around, because we are seeing the spread. I think it's safe to say you're seeing already. You're not going to see a lot of basketball, the next week or two. That's just my gut. I hope I'm wrong, but I do think now we have to sit there and say, all right, the student athlete, not only matriculation, but the day in day out has been interrupted. How do we compound that in a good way and make it where they're still feeling like they're attended to, they're growing, and have a positive experience here?
Yeah, I think you hit on a key point, and that's, I think, at the end of the day, one of the stories that will be written someday will be how we dealt with the mental health aspect of this pandemic. There's certainly the actual medical aspect of it in terms of the physical manifestation of that, but the mental health part of it will be critical. So I'm glad to hear that you and I know others are recognizing that as a critical piece. Hey, one more question, and then I'll end it with I'll throw a softball at you.
Yeah.
I know you're doing a lot in the area of fundraising and facility infrastructure expansion and that kind of thing. And one of the first interviews that we did on this from the Chair Series, Ross Bjork made the comment that he felt like in today's world, you almost have to have 2 different athletic directors, one who is adept in legal and business issues, and one who maybe is adept in fundraising and development and marketing issues. And that's not to say that you can't have general success or knowledge across the board and all that, but we tend to come from areas of strength. You have had an unbelievable background in finance and business and operations, but the thing that I've noticed during your tenure at Georgia Southern is you have made significant progress in the area of fundraising, and then how that is affecting what you're doing from a infrastructure and facility standpoint. So first of all, do you buy what Ross was saying as sort of the way things align? And then secondly, if you do, how do you then, you have to be involved in fundraising at some level as an athletic director, right? That's just part of the world to help you achieve vision. I'd love to hear what you're doing there at Georgia Southern in that regard, and how you've really sort of dove in more in that particular area of your work.
Yeah, I'd probably spin it a different way from Ross, who I have a ton of respect for. I'd say there's probably a left side of the brain and a right side of the brain. And I will share with you, I mean, to me, I think all of us, Mike, are our toughest critics. And so, growing up in the business, I had a lot of great mentors, and really at Mississippi State, John Cohen did a lot for me, just to allow me to have a broad-based set of experiences just beyond the finance CFO route. And so, I was very blessed and fortunate to get experience heavy the last year and a half or two on the external side, particularly in the marketing piece and really the fan engagement piece, social media piece. And so I wanted to be able to, one, continue to grow, but two, when I go through the interview process, speak somewhat intelligently. You don't have to be an expert, subject matter expert in every area, which is probably what Ross was referring to. I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. You have to have really smart people and hire people that can do a great job. I'm still learning every day on the fundraising piece. I think it still goes back to, though, it's really about relationships. I remember, I had a good fortune working with Carla Williams at Georgia. I remember Carla got hired and they were asking her kind of some of the same questions. And I remember seeing an article that talked about it's really about having, one, the people skills of fostering genuine relationships, two, having a vision, be able to sell them on the vision, and make sure they know what direction we're going and they can hop on board. And I really think that, Mike, that's an overgeneralization. But I think sometimes at the end of the day, you can have paralysis by analysis. And if you go back to it, it's honestly going back to forming genuine relationships. Get people excited about what you're doing. And again, I mentioned this in my press conference when I got hired. When you come up through the finance route, I think CFOs today are different than they used to be. Growing up, CFOs were very expense minded. Today's CFO, right, and really the COO deputy route are very forward thinking revenue generators. And I think that makes you unique. And so, I had this conversation and really proud of Graham Neff getting the job at Clemson. Graham and I came up, through the same background in finance. And I think what you're starting to see is those individuals in our business, and I'm proud of it, is those that they understand finance and operations, but also have the skill set to understand the external piece, understand the fundraising piece and how it all ties together. And so I think that's probably the pendulum at some point might swing back a little bit that way. I think it makes you unique. But you're right, the fundraising piece, end of the day, Mike, I mean, it's really, yes, it's a engine in a lot of ways, and it provides the resources to have a high level of competitive success. But you also, too, at the end of the day, you're only as good as the relationships with those around you and those that have buy-in to the program. And so, yeah, I mean, the first year, I joke with people. I think my dealer, the car dealer, got tired of me trading out the cars all the time because I was going, 5,000 miles a clip and doing it, pretty quick. But at the end of the day, I'm so happy, and our staff's so happy. We got out that first year and really took the time, grassroots wise, to get all over the state and all over the Southeast to establish that rapport. Because then once they knew us and they could trust in us and really understood our vision, then we started obviously being able to start some campaigns to raise money. And listen, we've been blessed and starting $71 million in projects this spring, which I don't think's ever been done here. I guess if you take the stadium and do a time value calculation, but we have a brand new convocation center, which is a combination arena, classrooms at almost 59 million. And we have a brand new indoor practice facility that's going to be $12+ million that creates actually revenue as well. And so when you start looking at, Mike, the synergies of having the cranes in the sky and having growth, people are now seeing the progress that we all want. And I just think it's a combination of it's understanding where your areas of growth are. And then you got to surround yourself with really good people. Eric Griesner does a great job of leading our foundation. And he's brought and recruited a lot of great people. I've been on our guests with me in Mississippi State. And so I think at the end of the day, when you have those good people and the people that you want to break bread with and spend time with away from the office, but also understand the standards of getting out and we're not going to be outworked, I think it all kind of comes to a head at some point. And that's where you're starting to see some of the output as far as some of the fundraising records we've hit.
So, if you were not an athletic director, based on following you on social media, I would say you might be a grill master. I know you love to cook and grill, and it's interesting and intriguing to me. There are a bunch of I would call it young guns in the industry who seem to have some competition going on how to prepare a pork butt or how to do their ribs or whatever. Let's say you're in the summer and you're getting ready for a July 4th cookout at your house and you have the time to actually prepare and do it right. What's your go-to in terms of what you like to grill? And maybe even talk about the fact that I know that you do it a lot. So it's obviously therapeutic at some level, right? So what's the draw to that for you?
Well, the draw is it's kind of, it's kind of idiot proof. One, I mean, in some ways it's helpful for my guy. My golf game is average. I don't play enough to be good, and when you're competitive and you're not good at something, it's hard, it's frustrating. So I started picking up just, I'd say smoking, meats and barbecue a couple of years ago. And really, it's a lot of times just to have fun. And really, it's for us, it's great with my boys that are 8 and 6. It's kind of become fun. They help me kind of prep the meat and do it. And now, listen, we actually have a healthy competition here in the office that we're going to play out the spring football game. We have some people, we like to trade barbs about who's the better barbecuer. We're going to let the meat and the product speak for itself this spring. But really, it's a lot of fun because I would tell you, one of the things that I love about Georgia Southern is we really try to make it family-like. People talk about it, but really I enjoy having people over to the house, whether it be coaches and staff, and breaking bread. It's a lot of fun to have families together and people together. And food's always been, if you think about it, always kind of been at the center of a lot of gatherings. And so now, listen, maybe my food's not good. They don't tell me that, and that's probably smart on their part. But no, all kidding aside. But we have a lot of fun, and so a lot of times this summer, I know obviously I'm a big pulled pork guy, but I really enjoy cooking brisket. And so brisket's probably my go-to, and then really with the smoker, everything from do sides of green beans, mac and cheese are pretty easy. Everything. Now I'll tell you that the griddle piece is really important. If you can complement what you're smoking with a griddle and do some stuff, it even makes it better. But no, it's fun to cook. It's therapeutic. That's one way of looking at it. And to me, it's I don't have a pit like a pit smoker. It's a pellet grill, and people give me a hard time. I don't have the time to sit around, and a lot of people in our position don't have time to sit around an active fire. But obviously the pellet grills worked out really well. But it's been fun because in the department we'll bring in samples or people talk about it, and I'll invite people over. And some of the competitors won't come over because they don't want to try and admit it's good. But we have fun with it, in the department, and ultimately. And I'll tell you a funny story, Mike. I took a brisket to Coach Helton and his staff the very last day of the recruiting process, and we had some on-campus visitors, official visitors, and actually brought it to them. Well, ended up some of the recruits, I guess, tried some that was there or whatever, and Coach Helton called and said the brisket worked. Now, that's just that's him being nice, but I was joking that if this doesn't work out, then maybe I can open up a catering service or a barbecue restaurant. So.
That's awesome. Well, I would say in your spring game competition, you're probably going to need to anonymize your brisket so that the ballot box doesn't get overloaded to you specifically. Though you say
I think it'd be the opposite, Mike. I actually think there'd be some people that would do it in spite of and would choose somebody else. So I agree with you. It needs to be anonymous.
I gotcha. Hey, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking some time out today to visit with me. Very informative. Not only in terms of just your personal philosophy around what you're doing, but answering key questions that I think a lot of folks are asking themselves as it relates to how to go about their roles and to improve on what they're doing. So Jared, thanks for joining me today.
No, Mike, listen, it's a blessing to be here. And listen, I appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship, and obviously it's a huge honor to be on here with you today.
Same here, man. So you've been listening to From the Chair. This is your host, Mike Hamilton, and today's guest has been Director of Athletics at Georgia Southern, Jared Benko. It's a great conversation. I hope you'll download it wherever you listen to podcasts or watch it on YouTube, and we'll see you next time on From the Chair.